Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's tour, The Changing Face of Atlantic Avenue. This tour is part of our Preservation Conference Tour series. We have in-person conference walking tours coming up in June, including Morrisania Music Legacy and 50 Years of Bronx River Restoration. In addition, we have our Scenic Stewardship series, which includes a bike tour of Brooklyn scenic landmarks and a tour of the changes in Central Park. Information about all of our upcoming programming can be found on our website, hdc.org. If you have any questions about programming, you can contact me at marbulu@hdc.org. Tonight's tour will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel for free viewing. You may also watch all of our previous virtual tours, preservation school classes, and conference panels on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, City Council, and the New York State Council on the Arts for supporting the conference. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and Suzanne will address them at the end. Now I will hand it over to Suzanne Spellen to lead tonight's tour.
Good evening, everyone. I'm having some technical difficulties, so hopefully this works right. Come on, there we go. So tonight's tour is The Changing Face of Atlantic Avenue. And I'm a historian, so most of this tour is a history tour, and I do go into what's going on now, but I'll warn you right away, I am not an expert about the current events, so I've tried to understand them as best I can, but we'll see what happens. So, like most things in this city, our tour starts with the Lenape people who settled this area long before the Dutch showed up. And when the Dutch did show up, they quote unquote bought the land from the Lenape, who thought that they were only trading for the use of the land, not the ownership of the land, because they didn't have a concept for that. And before they knew it, they were being pushed out, and it took 100 years to do it, but they were gone by the 1700s. Um, Atlantic Avenue actually began as one of the Native American trails. And when the Dutch took over and started farming the land, different settlers picked different spots. And one of them was Ralph Patchen. And he picked a spot that looked over New York, the East River. And his farm was pretty large, but he put his manor house almost on the shore of the East River, so he had a wonderful river view. And he called the trail his road to his estate. So Ralph Patchen's Road was the first European road that would eventually become Atlantic Avenue. So this is a map of from 1810 of the village of Brooklyn. And you can see Brooklyn was only Brooklyn Heights at that time, and not even all of Brooklyn Heights. The land had been divided up by the Hicks brothers way over there on the left, and all of the street grid means that the portions were lined up, but as you can see from the little rectangles and squares, there wasn't a whole lot of development there yet. On the right side, this was Pierpont land, and this would end up becoming the wealthier side of Brooklyn Heights with the big mansions and everything in the 1850s. But for now, it was totally blank land, more or less. The street grid was laid out, but the lots had not been sold yet. And at the time, the street that divided Brooklyn Heights, or this village of Brooklyn, from South Brooklyn was called the District Street. And here's a close-up of that map, and you can see down there on the bottom, District Street, separating South Brooklyn, which is today's Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Gowanus, and Red Hook, from the village of Brooklyn. And it's also interesting that Red Hook Lane intersected with that, and now it's almost all gone except for an alley that's in downtown Brooklyn. Okay, by 1855, District Street was Atlantic Street, and it ran from the East River to Jamaica. And farmers were especially glad to have this there because all of the farms in Long Island and in Jamaica, Queens, the farmers could bring their goods to market by going down Atlantic Street. And so it was a very valuable and first east-west commercial route in the city of Brooklyn. Meanwhile, in 1836, the Long Island Railroad had its first trial run, and it was soon running between South Ferry down by the shore to Jamaica. And this is a picture from 1911 Brooklyn Eagle showing the one of the trains. And at that time, the train ran above ground, so it was Atlantic Avenue was certainly nothing like it is today. And in this picture, which is from the 1890s and is actually the intersection of Atlantic Avenue and Nostrand Avenue, which is now in Bedford Stuyvesant, and you can see the two tracks, one going east, the other going west. And Atlantic Avenue, the roadway was this dirt roadway that's on the right side of the picture. So it was certainly very different than the other. Oh, the other half of Atlantic Avenue was on the left side, a little ways away from the curb. So it's just hard to imagine today Atlantic Avenue looking like this. And the trains ran above ground, which made development along the avenue very difficult because it was noisy, it was polluting, and the value of the land was decreasing because of that, because nobody wanted to build houses along that route. This is a train coming out of the tunnel that's where the Barclays Center is today, and at the time, I'm sorry, it's not where the Barclays Center is. Anyway, this is a train coming out of the tunnel. And here's another shot of the train tracks running down the center of the avenue. And this is Atlantic Avenue going from the right to the left. And that's Bedford Avenue going from top to bottom. And again, you can see these crossings. The crossings were one of the reasons that in 1901 they decided to put the tracks underground for a great deal of the time. Here's a shot of trolley cars going across the railroad tracks at Nostrand. Back in downtown Brooklyn, the Long Island Railroad built a new Beaux-Arts terminal for passengers, and they revised the tracks and the cut between Atlantic and Pacific. So here's a map showing that intersection, and you can see the Long Island Railroad Depot in pink, but right behind it was the commercial depot, and this was where freight trains came in, and the meat district of Brooklyn was right there, right behind it. So all of those buildings on the street behind the depot were all, as you can, if you can read it on your screens, they were all meat businesses. You've got Armor had a couple of businesses on the street, one on either side of the road, and actually Armor was so large that they had their own depot underground by the tunnel, so by the cut, so that they could just bring their goods, their meat, into their plants from the tracks. They didn't have to go above ground. And this is well, by now it's the Vanderbilt yards that run between Atlantic and Pacific. And here's a shot of the meat district. As you can see, it looks a lot like the Gansevoort meat district used to look. A lot of open air markets and places for trucks and wagons to load up. And it was dirty and messy and smelled horrible. And it was there until the 1960s and 70s. Anyway, this is about Atlantic Avenue. So The tracks that they laid underground came up out of the ground at Bedford Avenue and turned into an elevated train until they went back underground at Howard Avenue in East New York. And here's a shot of the 23rd Regiment Armory on the corner of Bedford and Atlantic. And you can see from this 1940s tax shot that the cut where the train came up out of the ground, and it used to have a lovely cast iron fence, of which most of it's gone now. You can see the in the bottom picture, that's a more contemporary view. So the Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide was a trade paper for builders and developers, and it ran basically from 1860 something all the way into 1922. And in addition to listing all the buildings that were going up and advertising and articles about various real estate deals and things like that, they did a lot of social opining. And they also picked different neighborhoods to talk about from time to time. And in 1912, they wrote an article about Atlantic Avenue and what was going to happen to it. And they came to the conclusion that Atlantic Avenue was never going to really develop as a premier street because of the railroad. And there's a quote that they had here: was an avenue more than 100 feet wide and extending the length of Brooklyn, whose residential usefulness was largely nullified by railroad occupancy and use. And because the land was so cheap along Atlantic Avenue, it became home for a lot of charitable and religious organizations. And here we have three of them that are in the district that we're talking about, which is roughly between Vanderbilt Avenue and Nostrand Avenue. There was St. John's Hospital on the top, the small picture, and you have the Brooklyn Orphan Asylum, which was in Bedford Stuyvesant, and you have the cathedral school, which I don't have my notes, and can't remember the name of it exactly. I'm so sorry. Anyway, also there were some important industrial and commercial buildings, including these two. The one on the left was the Long Island Railroad substation, and it is still in operation. And on the right was the New York and New Jersey Telephone Company. Today it's Verizon. And back when this building was built, the top two floors were taken up by telephone operators who sat at those long desks and connected people for their calls. And the other floors were for paying bills and offices. And they had a repair floor as well for repairing telephones. This is another quote from that same article in the Reader's Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide. The avenue enhanced its fame only to the extent of becoming a fine thoroughfare for automobiles, and its future structural character gives promise of being garages and factories. Whoever wrote that was a visionary, and he was exactly right. So by the end of the Great Depression, much of Atlantic Avenue between Vanderbilt and Nostrand was home to automobile-related businesses. Lots of garages, service stations, repair stations, showrooms, anything that had to do with automobiles, it was located here along Atlantic Avenue. There's another service station. These are all from the 1940s. And you have Esso over there on the right, and somebody else over there, Texaco on the left. And this is just a little history of the changes that went on Atlantic Avenue. And this is 998 through 1006 Atlantic. It's located between Grand and Classen. And most of the buildings on Atlantic in this section that we're talking about were called taxpayers. And that's 1- and 2-story buildings that were really temporarily built. They weren't overbuilt with a lot of load-bearing walls and whatnot. They really were made to be torn down as necessary and something better going on. But in the meantime, they were paying the taxes for the owners and they were supporting a lively industry, mostly automobile related. And this building was constructed in the 20s, and most likely from the large windows, it was a showroom. So between 1941 and 80, it belonged to the Industrial Home for the Blind, and it was opened as the Miller Memorial Hall. And you can see they closed up all of the windows, and during the war, blind men worked here making goods for the Army, Navy, and the Marines. One has to wonder why they didn't have any light. I guess they felt the blind didn't need it, but it looks like they didn't have any ventilation either. Not much anyhow. Anyway, they lost the home in 1998. It was sold again and sold once more, and someone bought it in 2015 for $5.1 million, which is a sure sign that that building will not last forever. And that's the business that was in it now. There's some very cool buildings on along this line, and here's one of them, 894 Atlantic. It was probably a garage space, and they would had ramps inside or elevators, and cars were parked for long-term storage, and it most likely had some kind of a showroom or a drive-in garage kind of facility that you can see in the 1940s tax photo on the left. This is some detail from that building. This one was especially nice, very wonderful Art Deco stonework, and this put it a cut above a lot of the buildings on Atlantic Avenue. It's still there, as is this one. I love the Gothic detail that's under there somewhere. And you can see from the, excuse me, large bay windows that it was probably also some kind of a showroom. Here's one of my favorites. This is 1030 Atlantic Avenue between Grand and Classen. This is still there. This is a contemporary photo. And it was opened as Tilden's new super service station. And in the ad on the right, you can see it was this building in the back and two wings on the side that held garages and all kinds of things related to automobile repair. And apparently Tilden did quite well. It's really unusual that the building still remains there. It's a large lot and just ripe for development, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody snatched it up and is planning development now. This was the former Packard service station and storage garage. You can see here on both ends of the building the Packard symbols with the grill, the car grill with the P on it, held up by cherubs, and the Packard name was on there. And the bottom is a very fuzzy postcard, but it's showing this sort of huge car care station. You could drive right in, and it looks like they had all kinds of, garage facilities, and also they had parking and showrooms above that as well. That's it today. Like many buildings on Atlantic Avenue, it was covered up with this siding, and unfortunately, with this particular building, they removed all of the detail that was on the Packard, the cherubs, and the grill, and all of that is gone. They took it all off before cladding the building in this tin. Here's a shot of Franklin and Atlantic in 1941. Again, there's a gas station on the corner in the foreground, and all kinds of other businesses in that large building. Here's another one, big taxpayer with all kinds of different car-related businesses. And that's this today. It's probably already been designed and it's going to be a very large building or a series of buildings. And here, little gem is some of the only wood frame buildings left in the corridor we're talking about, or left on Atlantic Avenue, period. And you can see on the 1904 map, there were two sets of semi-detached buildings, and then there were three other wood frame buildings next to it. You can still see the two, well, part of this left side set and all of the middle set, and the one next to it is also wood framed. So it's amazing they've still survived. And up until a few years ago, the two buildings in the middle were a home furnishing store. Very nice one, owned by an African American woman who had all kinds of wonderful things in there. Anyway, Atlantic Avenue has become the home of self-storage facilities. All of these are within the footprint, well, one of them is not. Most of them are within the footprint of the space between Vanderbilt and Nostrand. And the only one that is not in there is the extra special store on the right there. That one's on Atlantic and uh, Brooklyn, not Brooklyn, I think Troy Avenue. It's up a little bit further. But whoever owns CubeSmart, they just went nuts. And it makes you gotta wonder, how much storage do people need? Here's another transformation. This is 1260 Atlantic Avenue. This is on the corner, almost on the corner of Nostrand Avenue. And this was built for Murray Industries. And Murray was an inventor who used to work with Thomas Edison, and he was one of the most important people in the world of inventions. His inventions were second, his patents were second only to Edison himself. And he had quite a business here that was very, very, very successful and ran all through the most of the 20th century. And that's what it is today. I guess it's good that they haven't torn these buildings down. They just threw the siding over it, but it doesn't do much for the streetscape. And here's another one that also became a covered up storage place. This was actually the first one. This one was the one that was a storage facility before, and it still is, although a lot less good looking. And here's just a before and after shot. This is the corner of Atlantic at Franklin, and you can see the Franklin Avenue shuttle tracks above that. And they were doing some road work, and you can see the building on the left with the tapestry brick patterns. Well, here it is today, still there, kind of, sort of, and we'll see what happens. So this is Atlantic Avenue today. It's all mostly these one-story garages and other taxpayer buildings, and it's multi-story industrial and storage buildings. There are a few row houses, and those are mostly in the Clinton Hill part of our study. So in 2013, a subcommittee of Community Board 8 wanted to draft a plan that would improve the zoning along our corridor and allow for housing and other uses besides industrial uses. The area was zoned M11 for industrial use only, and because of that, even if someone wanted to, they were not able to build anything along Atlantic at that time. So this plan was put into place, and people were building on Atlantic, but they had to get spot zoning. So that meant the city had to allow them, basically opt them out of the zoning and allow them to do what they wanted. But that was not true for everyone. So in order to improve the area, um, encourage some affordable housing and some mixed uses for the rest of the neighborhood, including the blocks that were adjacent to Atlantic Avenue on the Crown Heights side. this plan was developed. It was called the M Crown Project, and it was manufacturing commercial residential opportunities for a working neighborhood. It was approved by the community board 8 in 2015, and they presented it to the administration, and the administration took it and sat on it for a while. But in 2016, they began to look at it again and they released their land use framework. And you can see here they highlighted three different sub areas for consideration. Atlantic Avenue in pink would be a high density mix of commercial and residential buildings. The Western Mid Block mixed use would be uh, moderate density mixed use development, and the eastern mid block would be commercial and industrial uses. They wanted to keep some industrial zoning because they wanted to encourage industry to come to this area, which was vastly underserved by just about everything. So the plan was approved, and then COVID happened, and the plan was not officially adopted by the city council or the mayor. And meantime, as I was saying, spot zoning was approved for several large projects along Atlantic and also on Pacific. City Councilwoman Crystal Hudson, who represents District 35, which incorporates parts of Crown Heights and Prospect Heights and parts of Clinton Hill and Fort Greene. She and a team of planning professionals from the Department of City Planning and other agencies, along with the CBA, CB2, CB3, and lots of local residents and organizations, they came up with a new plan, or a revised plan from the other one, and this was called AIM Up, or the Atlantic Avenue Mixed Use Plan. It had basically the same footprint for the development area, and you can see here how far it goes, and you can also see here very clearly the inland blocks, the southern blocks of Pacific Dean and parts of Bergen. So this is what Atlantic Avenue looks like today, keeping in mind the AIM Up plan. This is closer to Clinton Hill. Well, this is in Clinton Hill, and this is the only part of Atlantic that has some residential mixed-use buildings in it. Lots of row houses from the 1870s and 80s, and with storefronts. This is down by Atlantic and Bedford, and we still have a lot of car businesses, garages, and that sort of thing. A lot of these buildings are no longer autos, but they're still in retail buildings selling all kinds of stuff, especially restaurant equipment. This is the cut coming out. The train comes out under Bedford. Here is Grand Avenue. Again, mixed use. And here's some more of that. And the plan outlined not only rezoning, but they wanted to include industry, and it was really well thought out and included all kinds of things, not just being able to build big, tall apartment buildings on Atlantic Avenue. They wanted to develop truly affordable housing. They didn't want luxury buildings just popping up and does nothing for affordable housing, which is so needed in that neighborhood, in all of Brooklyn, actually, all the city. And they wanted to encourage jobs and job training for jobs that actually would provide a living wage in New York City. They planned that around $40 an hour was what it would take for a full-time job for someone to be able to afford to live in New York City. They wanted to prioritize hiring and apprenticeships, and they wanted MWBE businesses, that's minority and women-owned businesses. They especially wanted technology, media, and other careers where minorities were underrepresented, and these are all good jobs that were encouraged to come here. They wanted community spaces and green spaces. They wanted the sidewalks made so that people could actually walk along Atlantic Avenue without risking their lives. And they wanted to advocate for the homeless shelter here in the Bedford Armory. And they also wanted to improve the lives of the men living here with health care, job training, etc. They also in the plan wanted this huge armory, which you can see the drill shed is the part on the right side. That's the one-story big open space. And then the head house on the left is where there were different rooms and offices and barracks originally and all kinds of other functional buildings. They want to make it so that the shelter is there actually helping people, and the rest of the building is turned over to community use with athletic tracks and whatnot, and community rooms, maybe some kind of schooling or job training or something like that, so that this entire wonderful landmarked building can be more utilized by more people. And because right now the drill shed is just storage, and there's not much going on there, and it's such a waste for this community. So the other streets involved in the plan that I mentioned before were Pacific, Dean, and Bergen between Grand and Bedford. And you can see from this Google map that there are still some automobile businesses along here, some empty lots, and some other buildings that are mostly industrial warehouses or small one-story buildings. And here's what we've got. This is Dean Street. This is also Dean Street. The Studebaker building, the big white one, was one of the first to be developed in this area, and it was designed to be an incubator kind of space for various industries, and it was semi-successful. But I'm sure that when the rest of this project ever goes into effect, it will be very successful because it's already set up. This is also still Dean Street, and you can see this is over towards Bedford Avenue, and there are a few brownstones still on the street at this point. Again, Dean. This is also Dean. There's a huge industrial area on Dean. And here we have some more of Atlantic. And this is Franklin Avenue between Atlantic, which is in the back, and Pacific Street. And this is an intact brownstone row. On the other side of the street are some small apartment buildings and a couple of new builds. But this intact brownstone row is in danger of massive development, maybe. And we're hoping that we can get this particular row protected in some way so that these are not torn down. This is Pacific Street as well, very underdeveloped. Again, Pacific Street. And again, Atlantic Avenue. And in 2023, Eric Adams rebranded this plan as the City of Yes Atlantic Avenue Mixed Use Project, putting his own spin on it and probably taking credit for it. It hasn't gone through all the approvals needed. In the meantime, development continues. And this building is on the corner of Dean Street and Franklin Avenue, and a little outside of where we've been talking about, but this is the kind of building that is going up all over historic Brooklyn. And that is it. If you have any questions, will try to answer them. I had to wing it on this because my notes did not show up, but hopefully I gave you enough information. There are, if you look up the plans. There's plenty of information online talking about what's going on now and what may go on in the future. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? You can unmute or put it in the chat if you'd like.
Guess not.
Well, so I know you're not, terribly well versed and you're not a developer. But what is your sense of how much, I'm going to say quote unquote affordable housing, and do you think it will actually be any real affordable housing?
I hate to be a cynic, but I think there'll be some, but I don't think there'll be nearly enough. I know enough about development to know that developers won't build affordable housing unless they can offset the charges by building luxury housing. And so, you get these buildings with 40 units that are affordable and 180 that are market rate. So I don't know. I think it's going to take federal government money to get this going, and I'm not sure what will happen. I do know that all of those empty lots and all of that garage space, those one-story garages, sooner or later they're going to get developed. It's a part of town that's got transportation. It's not that far from downtown Brooklyn, and it's sort of inevitable one way or another, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, that does make sense. Gib, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Thanks. Yes. I first of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gib Flaconi, and I've been involved in kind of facilitating the M Crown effort at Community Board 8 since about 2014. So on the subject of affordable housing and what will be accomplished through this rezoning, um, through a neighborhood rezoning, you really can't do better than what exists in the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program. That's the law of the land right now. So when you have a rezoning that increases residential density, that area must map at, at least one of the MIH districts. And MIH has been criticized since it was introduced for not being affordable enough. Doesn't have a lot of affordable units in any one of those, in any of its options, and the affordability levels are not as low as are really necessary to provide housing to keep somebody who's already facing displacement pressure in place with options. The one piece of good news that I can share is we've been told that as a function of City of Yes, before when the City of Yes housing opportunity package will probably be approved before this rezoning. And what's going to happen there likely is the MIH option 3, which is the deep affordability option, will be modified so it can be mapped on its own. What that means is right now it's only able to be mapped in conjunction with either options 1 or 2, and those options have affordability levels that are not as deep as option 3. So if they're mapped together, any developer who builds on such a lot is going to opt for the higher rents, not the lower rents. So the idea that it can be mapped on its own will mean that more of the deeply affordable housing, it will be possible for the council member, if she so chooses, to require deep affordability, 20% of affordable floor area at 40% AMI across the whole rezoning area, which would be probably the first time that's happened in a neighborhood rezoning. So that's that's the good news on affordability. There's also a couple of sites that are actually not within the footprint of the main rezoning area, but are being included in the plan anyway, which are city-owned sites that are going to be sold for 100% affordable development to nonprofits. One of them is a vacant lot on Bergen Street, on Dean Street between Carlton and Sixth, which is now a parking lot for HPD. And another one is an HPD building on Bergen between Carlton and Sixth. And those are supposed to be developed. One of them, the Bergen building, will be family housing, deeply affordable. And the other building on Dean will be senior housing, deeply affordable. So there will be some affordable housing that will come out of this rezoning. Sorry to go on so long, but
No, thank you. That'll be great.
I thought it was very helpful. Thank you.
Let's see what's in the chat.
Don't see any. Well, I should also
There's
make a plug. If you're interested in the rest of Atlantic Avenue, Atlantic Avenue was one of our 6 to celebrate. So we also have a walking tour guidebook of it, if anyone is interested. That can be found on our 6 to celebrate website, 6tocelebrate.org.
okay. There's a chat from Fire Tablet, who's someone I know, and she says she can't figure out how to unmute. All you have to do is click on the little icon that looks like a microphone in the left-hand bottom corner, and that should allow you to be able to unmute.
I just sent an ask to unmute, so that might help.
There she goes.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
I have a question that's not directly about Atlantic Avenue. At the start, you mentioned about the farms over near the East River. My question is, has it always been called the East River? It's really odd that it hasn't been named after someone, unless there's someone named East.
As far as I know, it was always the East River. And the
Okay.
farms were actually in Long Island, in Jamaica, and further out. And it was quite a trip for the farmers to take horse-drawn wagons all the way from Long Island all the way to the end of Brooklyn. So it made it much easier for them, and it was invaluable in the growth of Brooklyn and Queens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I'm not mistaken, that comes from the Lenape as well. Didn't they simply refer to it as like the East Part River or like something like that?
I really don't know. I don't want to say yes or no on that one.
Yeah, I gotta double check that.
I really did appreciate the presentation. I guess I've never been on Atlantic Avenue east of like Vanderbilt or Washington. I never have occasion to be there, so it was interesting to see. And the taxpayers, so many are beautiful, and it's the way they were covered over. That's enlightening, interesting.
Yeah. I like a lot of them too.
Yeah. I think you had just written about them because I read.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed that article.
Yep, on Brownstoner. So it's just the 4 of us? Guess so.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, well, if there are no other questions, I guess we can say we are done. Thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is, you guys are aware it's been recorded. You can watch it on our YouTube channel. We have lots of other content. Please do check it out. And yes, if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gib.
thank
Bye.
you. Have a
Thank
good
you very
night.
much, Suzanne. This was
Bye.
fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good night.
You too.